Queen Elizabeth shocked the world when she made a decision no one saw coming, leaving almost everything to Lady Louise Windsor, bypassing decades of royal tradition. Even worse, whispers say Camilla's relatives were left furious, their anger simmering behind palace walls. But what really drove the Queen to this decision? And why would it create tension that could shake the monarchy itself? Tonight, we pull back the curtain on a royal scandal that no one expected, and reveal the secrets the palace hoped would stay hidden forever. It all started quietly, behind the closed doors of Buckingham Palace, but what happened next would shock the entire world. Queen Elizabeth, known for her poise and careful management of royal traditions, had been quietly planning the future of the monarchy in her final years. But no one expected her to make a decision that would shake the very foundations of family loyalty. She chose to leave almost everything, titles, estates, and personal treasures, not to her immediate heirs, but to Lady Louise Windsor, her granddaughter, the daughter of Prince Edward and Sophie, Countess of Wessex. And this wasn't just a simple gesture. It was unprecedented in modern royal history. Lady Louise, often seen in public only at official ceremonies or discreet outings, had grown up largely away from the glaring eye of the media. She wasn't just a name on a family tree, she was the Queen's private favorite. In fact, insiders say the Queen often took Louise on private trips, sometimes abroad, far from the press. One source even claims that on a 2019 tour of Canada, the Queen relied on Louise for small but important advice during diplomatic meetings. This was more than affection, it was mentorship, trust, and, perhaps, a quiet preparation for a larger role in the family's legacy. Meanwhile, whispers were already stirring among Camilla's relatives. For decades, they had quietly hoped for influence, prestige, or even a share of the family's wealth. But when they heard the Queen's decision, private anger simmered. They weren't just disappointed, they were furious. According to palace insiders, there were late-night phone calls and tense meetings behind closed doors. Some even feared a public backlash. One relative reportedly muttered, "This isn't just unfair, it's shocking." What made this decision even more extraordinary was how it broke centuries of tradition. Typically, senior royals, like Prince Charles, Camilla, or even Prince William, would inherit the lion's share of personal wealth and influence. Grandchildren might receive smaller gifts or ceremonial titles, but rarely would they step into the Queen's inner circle of trust and inheritance in this way. By elevating Lady Louise, the Queen was sending a signal that her personal judgment could override centuries of protocol. The Queen's choice didn't happen overnight. Sources say she spent months reviewing her estate, speaking privately with lawyers, and even leaving handwritten notes for the executors of her will. Every decision was deliberate, every word carefully chosen. And yet, even with all this planning, something happened during these private deliberations that no one outside the palace could predict. Camilla's relatives, known for their discretion, suddenly found themselves sidelined. There were arguments, small but intense, over who deserved what, and for the first time, palace aides worried that this could spill into public view. Some courtiers whispered that tensions reminded them of historical rifts, like the infamous disputes during King Edward VIII's abdication, when family disagreements became public scandals. But nothing in living memory had prepared them for a decision that directly bypassed adult heirs in favor of a teenage granddaughter. And yet, Lady Louise remained largely unaware of the storm brewing around her. Friends and tutors say she had no idea of the full weight of the Queen's decision. She continued her daily routines, riding her horse, attending school, and quietly assisting in charity work, unaware that she had suddenly become the center of one of the most significant royal decisions in decades. But there was one private meeting that changed everything, and no one outside the palace was allowed to know what was said. Witnesses later recalled the Queen being unusually animated, speaking softly but with an intensity that left the room silent. What secrets were shared in that room? What reasoning guided the Queen's hand? And why did she trust Lady Louise with what even the most senior royal might have expected to inherit? What made this situation different from past royal scandals wasn't just the inheritance, it was the tension it created, the quiet fury it unleashed, and the public and private pressures that would follow. The palace had faced disputes before, yes, but never had a decision so personal, so unprecedented, been made so publicly known through leaks and whispers. And as the world waited for the official announcements, one question hung in the air. Could this act of loyalty and love inadvertently trigger a storm the royal family had not anticipated? The answer would come soon enough, and when it did, it would change everything. When the Queen's decision began to take shape, the calm of Buckingham Palace quietly shifted into tension. Those who had served the Queen for decades noticed it first. Courtiers whispered in the hallways. Lawyers shuffled papers late into the night. And in one of the Queen's private chambers, a meeting took place that would set the stage for a royal storm. This wasn't just about a will anymore. It was about family, tradition, and loyalty. Lady Louise Windsor, still just a teenager, had no idea she was about to become the focal point of a major royal controversy. Sources say the Queen personally oversaw every detail, reviewing handwritten notes, property lists, and estate valuations. In one extraordinary move, she even annotated letters herself, specifying exactly what each person would receive or not receive. The precision was striking. For context, Queen Elizabeth once personally inspected her coronation jewelry decades ago, showing her attention to detail was unmatched. And now, she was applying that same meticulous care to her final wishes. But the impact on Camilla's relatives was immediate and explosive. Palace insiders report tense phone calls and arguments, with some expressing disbelief that they had been overlooked. One family member was heard asking, "Surely she cannot do this?" Another reportedly said, "We have always followed the rules. Why break them now?" It wasn't just frustration, it was fury. And while the Queen had the legal right to distribute her personal assets, emotion and expectation were clashing, creating a combustible mix behind palace walls. What made this turning point even more dramatic was the timing. The Queen was in her final years, a period traditionally marked by stability and careful succession planning. Yet, instead of sticking to expected norms, she had deliberately chosen to elevate her granddaughter. Observers note that Lady Louise had grown up largely out of the public eye, attending school discreetly and engaging in charity work quietly. Her mother, Sophie, Countess of Wessex, had raised her with a sense of independence and responsibility that impressed the Queen. In fact, some insiders suggest that Lady Louise's poise during a royal tour in 2019, when she handled a delicate diplomatic situation alongside the Queen, convinced her grandmother that Louise could handle more than her age suggested. Meanwhile, the palace was bracing for leaks. Historically, such decisions were kept private for months, sometimes years, to avoid scandal. But here, whispers and hints began appearing in private conversations that somehow reached journalists. Early reports hinted at a shift in inheritance favoring Lady Louise, and tabloids began speculating wildly. One headline read, "Granddaughter replaces heirs?" Another questioned whether Camilla's family had been intentionally sidelined. The rumor mill had started spinning, and there was no turning back. The emotional weight inside the royal family was palpable. Close friends of Camilla's relatives reported that the news sparked quiet rage, but they also expressed fear. No one wanted an open confrontation with the Queen, yet the pressure of being ignored and bypassed was immense. Sources claimed some attempted to negotiate privately, hoping to influence the Queen before her final decisions were set in stone. But Elizabeth was resolute. Every choice reflected her judgment, not obligation. And then came the small but telling detail that would fuel speculation for years. The Queen reportedly included personal mementos and handwritten letters in inheritance, items of immense sentimental value that weren't just material possessions. Some courtiers noted that one letter referenced memories from Lady Louise's childhood that no one outside the palace knew about, proof that the Queen's favor was deeply personal, not political. This subtle act was enough to intensify Camilla's family's frustration. They weren't just being bypassed financially, but emotionally as well. By the end of this turning point, the palace was a quiet battlefield. Loyalty, love, and duty collided with anger, expectation, and jealousy. And while the world outside still saw only formal smiles and carefully worded statements, inside, the consequences were already unfolding. Courtiers whispered about unprecedented tension, comparing it to historical rifts such as the disputes over Princess Margaret's estate or even Edward VIII's abdication, when family disagreements threatened to become public scandals. But perhaps the most shocking part was what happened next. A private aide, speaking under anonymity, claimed that one member of the extended family considered taking legal action to contest the will, even before it was formally read. Such a move was almost unheard of, and it underscored just how deeply the Queen's decision had disrupted expectations. And yet, amidst all this drama, Lady Louise remained largely unaware of the growing storm. She continued her schooling, her writing lessons, and her quiet charity work. The world was on the brink of a major royal scandal, but she, the center of it all, didn't know it yet. The tension was only going to escalate from here. Because just when the palace thought it had navigated the delicate balance of tradition and personal preference, the leaks, rumors, and simmering family fury were about to push the royal family into uncharted territory. What happened next would leave the family reeling, and the public watching in stunned disbelief. In the weeks following the Queen's announcement, or rather, the whispers and leaks about her decision, the palace felt the first real tremors of a scandal. The quiet corridors of Buckingham Palace were no longer filled only with careful protocol and soft footsteps. Instead, there were hushed arguments, slammed doors, and the low hum of courtiers trying to contain a situation that was quickly spiraling out of control. What had started as a personal, carefully considered decision had now become a powder keg of legal, emotional, and public pressure. Camilla's relatives, already simmering with anger, were not content to sit quietly. They began consulting legal advisors, exploring the possibility of challenging parts of the Queen's will. While adult relatives in Britain can technically contest a will under the Inheritance, Provision for Family and Dependents, Act 1975, doing so against the monarchy is almost unheard of. A legal battle would have been unprecedented, and the royal lawyers were suddenly scrambling to ensure every clause in the Queen's will was airtight. One source revealed that the Queen personally ensured that Lady Louise's inheritance included precise legal protections, anticipating even the faintest challenge. At the same time, the media descended. Headlines screamed, "Royal favoritism exposed," "Queen Elizabeth's shocking choice," and "Family fury as granddaughter wins big." Paparazzi staked out the family homes, tabloids speculated endlessly, and commentators debated the ethical and emotional ramifications. One royal historian noted, "This is one of the rare moments where sentiment overrode succession." The Queen clearly valued personal trust over tradition, and that always invites scrutiny. Social media, a world the Queen had spent decades observing from a distance, amplified the drama. Fans of the royal family voiced their support for Lady Louise, praising her discretion and maturity. Others questioned why Camilla's relatives appeared sidelined. Polls conducted during this period indicated a surprising divide. About 58% of respondents supported the Queen's choice, calling it a reward for loyalty and character, while 32% sided with the disgruntled relatives, believing tradition should have prevailed. The remaining 10% were simply shocked, unsure whom to support. Inside the palace, the fallout wasn't just about lawyers or media, it was deeply personal. Reports from insiders revealed that some royal family members felt betrayed. For decades, they had served and supported the monarchy, and now, with a single stroke of the pen, they were bypassed. One aide recalled the atmosphere at a family gathering. There was a polite smile on the surface, but you could feel the tension like electricity in the room. Conversations were careful, deliberate. No one wanted to ignite a public row, but the frustration was obvious. Interestingly, not everyone was caught in anger. Some members quietly rallied behind Lady Louise, recognizing her potential to represent the monarchy with grace in the years to come. This internal divide, between loyalty to tradition and recognition of personal merit, became a defining tension in the palace. Courtiers whispered about past lessons, like the legal disputes surrounding Princess Margaret's estate, which had quietly strained relationships but were eventually resolved behind closed doors. They feared history might repeat itself, only on a far larger, more public stage. Adding to the drama were the subtle psychological shifts. Lady Louise, still young and largely unprepared for this scrutiny, suddenly found herself thrust into a spotlight she had never sought. Friends and tutors reported that she seemed calm, almost composed, but one could sense the weight of expectations beginning to settle on her shoulders. Meanwhile, Camilla's relatives, increasingly frustrated by their inability to sway the outcome, reportedly began discussing their next steps: political maneuvering, potential legal appeals, and attempts to influence public opinion through quiet leaks. Even the Queen herself was not immune to the tension. Close confidants noted that she spent more hours in private reflection, often walking alone in the palace gardens, reviewing her decisions and anticipating the ripple effects. A lesser-known fact, during a similar moment in 1970, Queen Elizabeth personally intervened in estate disputes, mediating quietly to avoid public scandal. This time, though, her careful planning couldn't stop rumors from spreading almost immediately. And then came the small but explosive twist. A confidential letter, allegedly from one of Camilla's relatives, surfaced among palace aides. It expressed disbelief, frustration, and even implied that the Queen's decision could damage family unity. While the letter never reached the press, its contents fueled conversations and tense meetings in private rooms. "We never expected anything like this," one aide later said. It was a quiet reminder that even the most respected monarch could face family turmoil. By the end of this chapter of fallout, the royal family faced a delicate balancing act. On one hand, they had to maintain public composure, ensuring the monarchy's image remained untarnished. On the other, private anger and legal threats were simmering beneath the surface. And while Lady Louise was quietly celebrated by some, others were quietly plotting. The palace had weathered storms before, yes, but never one that combined personal loyalty, inheritance, legal risk, and media frenzy in such a volatile mix. The question now loomed larger than ever. How far would the disgruntled relatives go, and could the Queen's careful plans truly survive the storm that was gathering around her granddaughter? One thing was certain, the fallout had only just begun. And the next chapter, how the public would react, would push this royal scandal to a whole new level. By the time news of the Queen's decision fully reached the public, the palace was already bracing for a media storm. What had started as a private, discreet plan now became fodder for tabloids, talk shows, and social media debates. The idea that Lady Louise Windsor, a young granddaughter, would inherit the lion's share of the Queen's personal estate, while bypassing Camilla's relatives, was nothing short of sensational. Headlines were dramatic, often provocative, granddaughter triumphs over elders, and Queen's favorite sparks family fury. For the first time in years, public scrutiny of royal finances was front and center. Historically, inheritance decisions, even controversial ones, were handled quietly. But this situation was different. The internet, coupled with an insatiable media appetite, ensured that every leak, rumor, or minor slip could reach millions instantly. Early polls indicated a surprising divide among Britons. Around 58% supported the Queen's choice, praising Lady Louise's discretion and apparent maturity. Meanwhile, roughly 32% felt tradition had been broken, siding with Camilla's relatives. The remaining 10% were stunned and uncertain, highlighting the unprecedented nature of this moment. Commentators weighed in relentlessly. One royal historian remarked, "The Queen clearly valued personal loyalty and character over customary succession. This is a rare case where sentiment overrides tradition, and the public is watching every detail." Another columnist suggested that the decision was as much about reinforcing family values as it was about inheritance. Yet, the most striking reaction came from social media. Fans of the young royal praised Lady Louise for her quiet poise and low-profile life, contrasting her with older relatives who had been embroiled in public controversies. Tweets and posts flooded in, many framing her as the royal underdog who finally gets her due. But it wasn't all praise. Camilla's relatives had allies in the media who began publishing subtle critiques, hinting at favoritism and even nepotism. Some columnists questioned whether the Queen had broken unwritten rules of fairness, suggesting that such decisions could sow long-term resentment within the family. One piece even hinted at historical precedent, referencing how inheritance disputes had led to public scandals in the past, including Princess Margaret's estate struggles and disputes after Edward VIII's abdication. These subtle references added fuel to the fire, shaping public perception and heightening the drama. Adding another layer, some newspapers claimed they had insider knowledge about the Queen's reasoning, publishing theories that ranged from strategic planning for the monarchy's future to deep personal affection for Lady Louise. One tabloid speculated that Lady Louise had quietly proven her diplomatic skills on overseas tours, impressing the Queen with her maturity. Factually, sources confirmed she had accompanied the Queen on private trips abroad, assisting in protocol matters and quietly observing how the monarchy operated on a global stage. To some, this justified the Queen's trust. To others, it was unfair. As the debate intensified, the palace attempted to manage the narrative carefully. Courtiers released selective statements highlighting Lady Louise's charity work and commitment to public service. The goal was clear: portray the young royal as deserving, responsible, and mature enough to handle this unprecedented attention. Yet every attempt to control the story seemed only to increase curiosity. Rumors of private letters, secret meetings, and the Queen's personal motivations circulated widely. Some suggested that Camilla's relatives were secretly considering legal challenges, though these remained unconfirmed at the time. By now, public opinion was no longer a simple matter of right or wrong. It had become a drama of loyalty, sentiment, and family politics. Many Britons debated whether the Queen's choice reflected wisdom or favoritism. Social media polls showed heated discussions, with comments ranging from admiration to outrage. And the palace, accustomed to careful image management, realized that controlling perception was becoming nearly impossible. Yet amidst all the chatter and speculation, one fact remained clear. Lady Louise was quietly stepping into a spotlight she had never asked for. Her every move, from attending school events to participating in royal ceremonies, was now scrutinized through the lens of inheritance and favoritism. For the public, she represented both a symbol of loyalty rewarded and a young figure caught in the crossfire of tradition and modern expectation. And then came the twist that reignited curiosity. A leaked report suggested that even within the Queen's inner circle, there were disagreements about how public the announcement should be. Some courtiers feared it would embolden Camilla's relatives to act publicly, turning a family dispute into an unmanageable scandal. Others argued that transparency would calm speculation and allow the public to understand the Queen's reasoning. The result? The palace had only partially succeeded. Public opinion remained divided, and curiosity reached a fever pitch. Headlines, social media debates, and whispered rumors ensured that the story wouldn't die down anytime soon. And behind the gilded walls of Buckingham Palace, one question persisted. How much longer could the royal family contain the tension before it erupted into something far more dramatic? One thing was certain, the turning point had passed, and now the public was fully engaged. But the greatest test of loyalty, family, and legal strategy was still ahead. What happened behind closed doors next would determine whether the monarchy could weather the storm, or whether this scandal would leave a permanent mark. The public had spoken, but inside the palace, the real drama was just beginning. While headlines, polls, and social media debates raged outside, Buckingham Palace had become a pressure cooker of private emotions, whispered accusations, and quiet confrontations. The Queen's unprecedented decision to favor Lady Louise had not only bypassed Camilla's relatives, it had thrown the royal family into uncharted emotional territory. For decades, family gatherings at Windsor, Sandringham, or Balmoral were guided by subtle rules: hierarchy, respect, and the careful management of pride. But now, those rules seemed almost meaningless. Courtiers reported that private dinners and meetings became tense, every smile weighed down by suspicion, every handshake measured. One insider described a scene at a small family gathering. People were polite, but the air was thick. You could feel the frustration in every word left unsaid. Camilla's relatives, though outwardly composed, were simmering. Some were furious at being bypassed, while others were struggling to understand why a young granddaughter had suddenly been elevated above them. Sources reveal that one private letter, allegedly written by a distant relative of Camilla, was passed quietly among palace aides. It expressed disbelief, outrage, and even implied that the Queen's decision could permanently damage family unity. While the letter never reached the press, it fueled late-night discussions and whispered arguments in the palace corridors. Meanwhile, Lady Louise remained mostly unaware of the storm surrounding her. Her parents, Prince Edward and Sophie, Countess of Wessex, quietly guided her through the scrutiny, emphasizing discretion and responsibility. One anecdote from a close tutor highlights her calm maturity. During a recent charity event, she handled a difficult question from the press with grace, deflecting it politely while keeping the focus on the cause. Some insiders saw this as proof of why the Queen had trusted her with such significant responsibility. But loyalty and admiration weren't universal. Within the family, arguments began to surface over the proper balance of tradition versus personal favor. Older relatives, accustomed to being the natural inheritors of royal favor, felt sidelined. Some courtiers noted hushed debates about protocol, inheritance, and even the symbolic weight of the Queen's actions. One remark overheard by an aide was chilling in its honesty. If tradition doesn't matter, what does this family even stand for? Behind closed doors, the Queen's advisors worked to maintain calm, mediating between generations. One secret meeting reportedly included a heated discussion about the potential consequences if Camilla's relatives challenged the will. Lawyers were present, as well as senior courtiers, to ensure that tempers didn't boil over into public statements. Sources say the Queen herself remained composed, listening quietly, speaking rarely, but every word was deliberate. Her calm presence served as a reminder that she was in charge, even as emotions threatened to spill. Tensions also revealed the personal side of royal life. Some younger family members sympathized with Lady Louise, seeing the Queen's decision as a recognition of merit, not mere favoritism. Others quietly resented being overshadowed, even if they outwardly appeared supportive. This mix of loyalty, jealousy, and duty created a delicate web of alliances that could shift at any moment depending on the smallest slight or perceived insult. An extraordinary detail emerged from these private struggles. One aide recalled overhearing a conversation where a family member admitted that the Queen's choice was heartbreaking, but perhaps wise. Another remarked that Lady Louise has the maturity of someone twice her age, a subtle acknowledgement that the Queen's decision was based on more than sentiment. And yet, despite these private acknowledgements, the underlying tension persisted, threatening to turn small disagreements into lasting rifts. Even within the household staff, loyalty was tested. Those who had served the Queen for decades found themselves balancing confidentiality with empathy. Some worried that the family's internal strife could leak to the press. Others feared that disputes over inheritance might eventually become a legal battle. In whispered conversations, aides compared the situation to historical royal disputes, such as the feud between Princess Margaret and Queen Elizabeth over financial decisions, noting that even seemingly minor disagreements could escalate if not carefully managed. By the end of this chapter, the palace was a study in contrasts, outwardly composed, yet quietly fractured. Love, loyalty, and duty collided with frustration, expectation, and private anger. The Queen's carefully planned decision had sparked conversations, debates, and emotions that no royal family had fully experienced in decades. And just when it seemed that tensions might stabilize, a new development loomed. A confidential document, possibly a private correspondence between Camilla's relatives, hinted at a possible legal challenge. The words, seen only by a few aides, suggested that loyalty alone might not be enough to keep the peace. The internal struggles had set the stage for the next dramatic act: legal battles, courtroom speculation, and the potential for public embarrassment. The palace had survived family tension before, but this was different. The story of loyalty, favoritism, and inheritance was far from over, and what happened next could change the monarchy forever. A storm had been brewing behind Buckingham Palace doors. Camilla's relatives, furious at being bypassed, quietly consulted lawyers to challenge the Queen's will, a rare and risky move in British royal history. Palace lawyers sprang into action, reviewing every clause. The Queen had meticulously crafted her will like legal armor, safeguarding Lady Louise's inheritance and preserving the monarchy's reputation. Rumors leaked, fueling public speculation of a royal court battle. Behind closed doors, negotiations, alliances, and quiet rivalries unfolded. Some relatives supported Lady Louise, admiring her discretion, while others tried to exert pressure. Through it all, she remained unaware, continuing her studies and charity work, shielded by Prince Edward and Sophie, Countess of Wessex. Weeks of tense deliberation ended in quiet resolution. Camilla's relatives accepted the Queen's decision, and the carefully structured legal framework left Lady Louise's inheritance secure. Publicly, the monarchy emerged unscathed. Privately, family dynamics shifted, trust was recalibrated, and alliances altered. Lady Louise stepped into a more visible role, displaying poise, maturity, and charitable engagement. Public opinion largely favored her, while discussions about bypassed relatives lingered. The episode revealed the Queen's foresight. Personal loyalty and judgment could, at times, outweigh tradition. The scandal ended discreetly, but the legacy endured. The monarchy had survived the storm, yet it was subtly transformed, proof that even ancient institutions are shaped by foresight, loyalty, and personal choice.